In a groundbreaking sci-fi tale exploring the complexities of time travel, scientists inadvertently unravel the fabric of reality, unaware that our universe is just one among countless others, each with its own distinct version of existence. As they tangle with the consequences of altering past events, the question looms: can they escape the chaos they've created? The story begins with Sophie and Malcolm, a loving couple living a content life with their young daughter, Riley. Their happiness, however, is shattered when Sophie wakes up one morning to face a harsh reality. Malcolm has been gone for nearly 8 months, the victim of a tragic accident. Malcolm, a brilliant scientist, met his end while crossing the street with his colleague, Jabir, an eccentric researcher. On that fateful day, a drunk driver named Darby lost control of his car and struck Malcolm, leaving Sophie alone to raise their daughter. Riley, deeply saddened by the loss of her father, has completely lost interest in her studies. Her grief has consumed her, and her behavior has become increasingly worrisome. While Sophie is at work one day, she receives a call from Riley's school. The news is devastating. The school has decided to expel Riley due to her repeated absences and lack of effort in her studies. Sophie is told she must come immediately to pick up her daughter. Unable to leave work, Sophie reaches out to Jabir, Malcolm's old friend, and asks if he can bring Riley home from school. Jabir, though preoccupied with his scientific research, an obsession he has maintained since Malcolm's death, agrees to help. He is still deeply immersed in his projects, often oblivious to the world around him. Later that day, after finishing her shift, Sophie heads to court. She hopes for justice in the case against Darby, the drunk driver responsible for Malcolm's death. However, to her shock and dismay, she learns that Darby has been granted bail. Heartbroken, she confronts her lawyer, venting her anguish. "He killed my husband while drunk, and now he's free? This man destroyed my life." But the lawyer can do little to change the court's decision. The injustice leaves Sophie feeling defeated. Determined to bring some joy back into her daughter's life, Sophie plans a birthday party for Riley and invites all her friends. She hopes the celebration will lift Riley's spirits and help her reconnect with others. However, Riley refuses, uninterested in seeing anyone or celebrating. Sophie's life feels like it's crumbling. She has lost her beloved husband, her financial situation has steadily declined, and now her daughter's struggles have added to her heartbreak. Sophie shares her struggles with Jabir, opening up about the weight of her grief and the challenges she faces after Malcolm's death. Listening intently, Jabir begins to share his own story. He recalls his childhood in the Middle East, a time marked by turmoil and tragedy. When he was young, a brutal dictatorship seized control of his country, targeting anyone who opposed the regime. One fateful day, while Jabir was at school, his entire family was massacred. He survived only because he wasn't home. Devastated and alone, he fled to America, haunted by the thought of what might have been if he could have gone back in time and saved his family. What Jabir reveals next shocks Sophie. He confesses that he and Malcolm had been working on a time machine, a groundbreaking project they hoped would make time travel a reality. However, Malcolm's untimely death cut the project short. Despite this, Jabir refused to abandon their dream and has finally completed the time machine on his own. Jabir shows the machine to Sophie, explaining its current limitations. While it isn't powerful enough to take them as far back as his childhood, it is capable of traveling to a more recent point in time, such as 8 months ago, before Malcolm's death. He proposes they use this opportunity to test the machine for the first time and save Malcolm's life. Sophie is skeptical. The idea of altering past events seems impossible to her, but Jabir insists that the machine doesn't work by physically transporting someone into the past. Instead, it can selectively remove individuals from the timeline. He proposes that they could target Darby, the man responsible for Malcolm's death, and eliminate him from the timeline before the accident occurs. For the machine to work, Jabir explains, they need detailed information about Malcolm's whereabouts just before the accident. A photo of Malcolm from that day would allow them to input his location and the events surrounding the accident into the machine. If they succeed in preventing Darby's actions, Malcolm's death will never happen. Sophie wasn't ready to go through with the plan. How could she take someone else's life to save her husband? Feeling conflicted, she left Jabir's place, saying she needed time to think. On her way home, she ran into Darby, who was drunk and fighting with his family. Seeing this, Sophie realized that Darby hadn't changed since the accident. The next morning, she went back to Jabir and reluctantly agreed to use the time machine to eliminate Darby and save Malcolm. To carry out their plan, they needed a photo and location of Darby from the past, before Malcolm's accident. They found an old picture of him on his social media. Jabir input the photo and location into the machine, then activated it for the first time. However, as the machine began processing, smoke started coming out of it. Jabir was confused since everything had been working properly until then. Sophie, losing hope, dismissed the idea of time travel, saying she should never have believed him. She started to leave, but her phone fell to the ground. When she picked it up, she saw something shocking. Malcolm was calling her. Realizing the machine had worked, Sophie ran to the park where Malcolm used to play play with their daughter. She was overwhelmed with joy to see him alive again after 8 months. Jabir was also thrilled that his invention had succeeded. Encouraged, he began planning upgrades to the machine to save his own parents. However, Sophie and Jabir soon noticed something strange. Changing the past had altered reality itself. In this new timeline, Malcolm had never died, and no one except Sophie and Jabir had any memory of the previous timeline. Since they were in the room when the time machine was activated, only they retained their memories. Sophie decided not to tell Malcolm the truth, choosing instead to focus on spending time with him and enjoying their family. She was incredibly happy to have him back. However, when Sophie returned to her office after some time, she discovered that in this timeline, she no longer worked there. This made her realize that changing one event in the past had created unexpected shifts in the present. Finally, Sophie went home and told Malcolm everything, that Jabir had built a time machine, and together they had used it to save him from the accident that had killed him 8 months earlier. The revelation of the time machine's success left Malcolm stunned. Struggling to process everything, he decided to confront Jabir directly. Arriving at Jabir's home, Malcolm demanded to know more about the machine and its implications. Jabir, brimming with enthusiasm, proposed an ambitious idea. If they could safely save Malcolm, why not use the time machine to alter larger, more significant events in history? Jabir suggested they go back and eliminate notorious terrorists before their atrocities, potentially saving countless lives. Sophie, however, was immediately opposed to the idea. She argued that they still didn't fully understand the consequences of altering past events. "We don't even know the extent of reality's changes from saving just one person," she warned. Sophie theorized that every time they changed something in the past, their consciousness might be shifting into a parallel universe where events had unfolded differently. Jabir paused, troubled by Sophie's theory. "You could be right," he admitted. "It's possible that when we killed Darby and saved Malcolm, we didn't just alter our reality. We might have entered a parallel universe where Darby's death was always part of the timeline, and Malcolm's accident never happened." Sophie pressed further, pointing out an even more unsettling concern. "Even if we save people in the past, how can we guarantee they won't go on to commit terrible acts themselves in the future? Human behavior is unpredictable, and tampering with time could unleash consequences we can't control." The three of them were now faced with an existential dilemma. Were they truly altering the fabric of their own universe? Or were they shifting into entirely different parallel universes with every change? The uncertainty was overwhelming. If their actions were reshaping their reality, what unforeseen consequences were they creating? And if they were instead entering new parallel universes, were they simply abandoning their original timeline to an unknown fate? On her way home, Sophie couldn't shake the thought of Darby's family. Feeling a pang of guilt, she began searching online for information about them. Despite the harm Darby had caused, Sophie had taken his life to save Malcolm, and now she was consumed with curiosity about the impact of her actions. Her search revealed that Darby had a wife, Kira, and a young daughter, Maggie. Both were now living in dire circumstances after Darby's death. Overcome with guilt, Sophie broke down in tears, realizing she was responsible for their suffering. The next day, Sophie decided to visit Darby's old home. She learned from neighbors that Kira had sold the house due to financial struggles and moved elsewhere. Determined to find her, Sophie tracked down Kira's new address and discovered she was working at a restaurant. Watching Kira quietly go about her work in such a difficult situation, Sophie felt even more remorseful. Wanting to help, she approached Kira, introducing herself as an old friend of Darby's. Kira, speaking softly, confided in Sophie about her struggles. Since Darby's death, life had become unbearable. They had lost everything and were now barely surviving. To make matters worse, her daughter Maggie was battling cancer, and Kira couldn't afford treatment. Hearing this, Sophie's heart ached even more. She invited Kira and Maggie to dinner at her home, determined to find some way to ease their suffering. That evening, as Kira and Maggie arrived for dinner, Jabir was shocked to see them in Sophie's house. His immediate reaction was one of alarm. "What are you doing?" he whispered to Sophie, pulling her aside. "We used the time machine to remove Darby from the timeline. You can't involve yourself with his family. It could lead to complications." Sophie, however, stood firm. "Jabir, I know what it's like to raise a child without a husband. I won't abandon Kira and Maggie to this misery when I can help. I already carry the burden of knowing I caused their suffering. If I don't do something for them, it will haunt me forever." Jabir reluctantly backed down, though his unease lingered. Sophie, meanwhile, resolved to support Kira and Maggie in whatever way she could, knowing it was the only way to quiet the guilt that weighed heavily on her heart. Everyone sat down to dinner together, and Kira opened up about her struggles. She explained that after Darby's death, a man had tricked her and taken all her property, leaving her with nothing. To make matters worse, her daughter Maggie was battling cancer, and Kira couldn't afford the treatment. Hearing this broke Sophie's heart. Meanwhile, Rayleigh and Maggie had quickly become good friends, playing happily together. After Kira and Maggie left, Jabir told Sophie that they needed to help Kira. The next day, they they gathered near the time machine, and Malcolm shared what he had found out. After Darby's death, a man had scammed Kira out of her property. Jabir suggested going back in time and stopping the man, possibly even killing him, to prevent Kira from losing everything. Sophie, however, was firmly against the idea. "We can't just keep killing people to fix things," she said. "Every time we change the past, it clouds reality. We don't know what could happen." Jabir insisted that changes to the timeline were inevitable. He revealed that he was upgrading the machine to travel as far back as 30 years so he could try to save his own family. "If we're going to change reality anyway, why not test it now by helping Kira?" he argued. But Sophie still refused and left the discussion. In the following days, Sophie continued to meet with Kira, growing closer to her and Maggie. Raleigh and Maggie became inseparable, playing together daily. But one day, Maggie suddenly collapsed while playing. Sophie and Kira rushed her to the hospital, only to learn that Maggie's condition had worsened significantly. Cancer had left her very weak, and neither Kira nor Sophie had the money to pay for her treatment. Feeling helpless and desperate, Sophie finally turned to Jabir. Against her better judgment, she agreed to use the time machine to remove the man who had scammed Kira, hoping it would save Kira from her financial ruin and give Maggie a chance at survival. Having used the time machine before, Sophie, Jabir, and Malcolm understood that altering the past would once again cloud their current reality. Still, they felt hopeful and excited to check on Kira and see how her life had changed. Unaware of the extent of their actions, they went to the restaurant where Kira had worked in the previous timeline. To their astonishment, Kira was no longer a waitress. In this timeline, she was the owner of the restaurant. Even more heartening, Maggie was now completely healthy. Kira had been able to treat Maggie's cancer at an early stage, preventing it from worsening. However, in this reality, neither Kira nor Maggie recognized Sophie, Malcolm, or Jabir. The three realized that their intervention had drastically improved Kira and Maggie's lives, and they couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and happiness. After enjoying lunch at the restaurant, they left feeling satisfied with the outcome and headed to Rayleigh's school to pick her up. For the first time in a long while, Sophie and Malcolm felt at peace, thinking their lives had finally settled into a better place. However, when they arrived at the school and asked Rayleigh's teacher about her, they were met with confusion. The teacher had no idea who Rayleigh was and claimed that no such student existed at the school. Sophie and Malcolm were horrified, their hearts sinking with fear. Desperately, they tried to make sense of what was happening. It suddenly dawned on them that by changing the past yet again, they had unintentionally altered their reality to the point where Raleigh no longer existed in their lives. At the same time, their house became completely covered in a strange fog, which made both Sophie and Malcolm worry about their child, Raleigh. They couldn't figure out what change they had caused in this new reality. While searching for answers, Sophie found a poster for a drama class at home, which strangely led to the discovery that Sophie was alive again in this version of reality. Hurrying to the drama class with Malcolm to find Raleigh, they were shocked to discover that in this new reality, Raleigh wasn't a girl as they remembered, but a boy who now called Sophie mother. This revelation terrified both Malcolm and Sophie. It confirmed Sophie's long-held theory. If they had used the time machine to go into the past and kill someone, it caused them to shift into a parallel universe. This meant that Sophie and Jabir hadn't saved Malcolm in the original timeline. Malcolm was still dead in his real universe. Instead, the time machine had transported them to a parallel universe where Malcolm was alive, but someone else, Darby, had died instead. It also explained why people close to the machine didn't remember events from the original universe when the reality shifted. They were no longer in their original world. Every time the time machine was used to change the past, those near the machine were pulled into a parallel version of reality. In this new reality, it would seem as if the person they killed in the past had always been dead. Jabir came to a sobering realization. Every time they had used the time machine to travel to another universe, his alternate versions in those realities had been killed. The reasoning behind this was unsettlingly straightforward. Without consciousness, a body could not survive. This harsh truth revealed that every alteration they made erased lives, effectively destroying entire versions of Jabir. Additionally, the societal structures they encountered in the parallel realities often failed to function, further highlighting the chaos they had unleashed. It was now clear to all three of them, Jabir, Malcolm, and Sophie, that in their quest to manipulate time, they had been acting as gods, changing realities to fit their desires, without regard for the consequences. The scale of what they had done was infinite, far too vast for anyone to fully comprehend. By this point, Jabir had successfully upgraded the time machine, making it capable of traveling 30 years into the past. Overwhelmed by guilt and the weight of their actions, Malcolm and Sophie told Jabir they no longer wanted to remember any part of their previous realities. They decided to leave the machine room and let Jabir carry out the final task alone. Jabir's plan was deeply personal. He would go back in time and prevent the deaths of his parents. By doing so, he would create a new reality where his parents never died. This would also mean that Jabir would never move to America, ensuring Malcolm and Sophie would never meet him. Without Jabir in their lives, they would never build the time machine. In this new universe, Malcolm and Sophie would have no memory of their past lives or the damage they had caused across countless realities. They would be free to live without guilt, unaware of the versions of themselves that had been lost. Jabir, however, would retain all his memories, every choice, every consequence, and every fractured reality. Despite the burden, he would find solace in living with his family in his homeland. And so the story ends on a somber note. Jabir sacrifices his dreams to ensure no further harm can come from the time machine, bearing the weight of the past alone. Meanwhile, Malcolm and Sophie find peace in ignorance, living their new lives in a world untouched by their previous mistakes. What are your thoughts on this ending? Share your theories in the comments below. If you enjoy dark, thought-provoking sci-fi, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more.